we've talked a lot about these Sustainable Development Goals. We're now going to very concretely sort of drill down into what they mean in terms of policy change and reform, both in Europe and across the world, but particularly obviously reflecting on European agriculture. So I'm going to invite my 4 panelists up onto the stage. Don't clap them right now. Clap them when they're all sitting here and I can introduce them to you properly. So all 4 panel members, you know who you are. Would you please come and take your seats right now, and then I'll give you an introduction. So come on, panel. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Hello. Good to see you.
Hi, Stephen.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hello.
Hello there, great to see you. Right, okay, so here we go.
Women here, the men there.
Now, we've got a minister, and we've got various representatives of European and global food production and politics with me. So let me introduce them one by one. We're going to have 2 keynote speakers, so let me introduce them first, if I may. Nathan Guy has come an awful long way to be with us in Brussels today. He's the Minister for Primary Industries in New Zealand. Bizarrely, you're also Minister for Racing. How come racing gets chucked in with the rest of it? I never quite understand.
I always joke it's because I'm the fastest in cabinet. But maybe it's not. The racing industry is very popular and very important to the New Zealand economy.
It clearly is almost defined as a primary industry, so that tells us something, yeah. So anyway, Minister Guy, thanks ever so much for joining us, because it is an awful long way, and we do appreciate your presence here. Our other keynote is going to come from Mari Kiviniemi, who is currently Deputy Secretary General at the OECD. She has a long and distinguished track record in Finnish politics. She's been minister for all sorts of different things, and Prime Minister, I believe, in 2010, 2011. So a former Prime Minister of Finland, currently at the OECD. So Minister Guy and Mari Kiviniemi are going to give us keynote thoughts. And then to pick up on the conversation and respond, I'm delighted to say we have Isabella Teixeira with us, who is a former Minister of the Environment from Brazil, somebody who was representing Brazil at climate change talks for years and all the way through the Paris process, so intimately involved with this sort of interplay between issues facing agriculture and food production and the environmental obligations and challenges that the world is, I hope, facing up to right now. So it'll be fascinating to get your perspective on this conversation. And our last contributor, last but very much not least, is Olivier de Schutter, who's co-chair of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. So we welcome you, Olivier, as well. Let's get right on with our keynotes. Then we're going to have a debate, and we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, and we've got roving microphones, ladies and gentlemen, so that is all covered. But let me first invite Nathan Guy to make his opening remarks. So over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's great to be here in this very historic city of Brussels. Can I congratulate the FFA for 10 very successful years, and I know the next decade is going to have heaps of opportunities and probably a few challenges along the way as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and I really enjoyed hearing from Kofi Annan just before, and I'm going to look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists shortly and getting stuck into getting the debate moving with you this morning. The Sustainable Development Goals have placed agriculture at the forefront of the global development agenda and have helped bring an important focus on issues of food security and sustainable agriculture. The scale and speed of our rising global production is well understood. However, the ability of agriculture production and distribution to meet this demand is a challenge that we must all address. For example, global population is forecast to grow by 2.3 billion by 2050, and global agriculture demand will need to increase by, it's estimated, around 60 to 70% to meet this growing demand. farmers worldwide are realising that they will need to produce more safe and nutritious food while operating with increasingly tight environmental constraints. Of course, the SDG goals are all interrelated and cover a number of areas of importance to food production. However, I want to draw on specific few of these goals and elaborate on how they relate to what we have experienced in New Zealand. New Zealand has a population of around 4.5 million people, and we currently can feed about 40 million people. We won't be able to produce much more food, yet we've set a target of doubling the value of our agriculture exports by 2025. The defining moment of this ambition really started in the 1980s. Prior to the 1980s, New Zealand was very much part of and considered pretty much UK's farm. The majority of our agriculture production was basic in nature and predominantly exported to one market. After the UK joined the European market, we were forced to adapt. Almost overnight, we moved from a very inefficient government-subsidised production system to a subsidy-free system that we still have today, and we are very proud of it. At the time, many thought it would be the end of farming in New Zealand, but farmers are innovative people. When required to, they will follow market signals. These days, farmers are a lot more connected to the consumer. They have adapted to produce high-quality products that consumers want to buy. We have changing demands from consumers, changing tastes, changing markets, and consumers want to ensure that food is indeed safe and it's produced sustainably. In order to find the most efficient way of improving on-farm performance, farmers need to be at the centre of innovation and listening carefully to the overall desires of consumers. In New Zealand, we have set up an initiative called the Primary Growth Partnership. It's helped to design and find new technologies and production systems that can fix problems facing the industry. Farming groups come together with the government and put proposals on the table that the government will in part endorse. Ultimately, it's about driving production, but also looking at the environmental performance inside the farm gate as well. We're working on a 50% increase in the efficiency of nitrogen fertiliser, 20% increase in the efficiency of phosphates, reducing overall nutrient losses and preventing harm to our waterways. We're using advanced monitoring and breeding techniques to produce sheep with higher levels of naturally present omega-3 fatty acids, which ultimately mean, as consumers, you will enjoy a healthier sheep meat product. We're developing and promoting technologies that help farmers digitise information about their overall farming practices, to track a number of indicators and ultimately share their best on-farm techniques with others in a way that improves productivity. We know that all of these products can help empower farmers to do what they do best, and that is to create more sustainable farming businesses. Today, we live in an age where consumers are increasingly aware of the products they consume. However, at the same time, they're also more detached from the processes that occur inside the farm gate. We all in this room collectively have a role to strengthen the urban-rural disconnect. Consumers need to know we are good stewards of our land and sea, and that they need to understand that we are focused on a social license to operate. In my opinion, and I'm a farmer myself, farmers and growers are naturally environmentalists. They want to leave their land in a better place for their children and for their grandchildren into the future. Similar to the aspirations of SDG 6, the New Zealand government has recently set a target to improve the quality of our waterways. New Zealand is blessed with beautiful natural resources. However, agriculture and urbanisation have had an impact. Currently, 72% of New Zealand rivers are swimmable. That's meaning that you can swim without getting sick from bugs in the water. The government has set a target of having 90% of our rivers and streams and lakes swimmable by 2040. This will involve farmers fencing 56 kilometres of waterways to exclude cattle and reduce E. coli. Now, 56,000 kilometres of fencing gets you from Auckland to Brussels, back to Auckland and back to Brussels again. Our dairy farmers over the last 10 years have fenced 24,000 kilometres of streams and rivers in New Zealand, and they need to be applauded in what they've done on a voluntary basis. As outlined in SDG 13, we also must take urgent action to tackle climate change. New Zealand is also keen to be part of setting the global economy on a pathway to low emissions future, and of course under the Paris Agreement on climate change. We realise that our emissions profile is different to many other countries, particularly here in the EU, with 50% of our emissions coming from animals. That's why we have helped to establish the Global Research Alliance with a focus on agriculture greenhouse gases, which has seen 47 member countries join up, which is fantastic, and 15 from Europe. It's not a one-size-that-fits-all approach, however. We're focused on rice paddies, pastoral livestock, and cropping. As a niche producer that makes its living in global markets, New Zealand experiences every day the obstacles in place for agriculture producers seeking to make a sustainable income from trading internationally. Developing countries also face similar issues. We need to move away, in my opinion, from jealously guarding domestic markets and consider how we can best work together as a whole to seize the far greater opportunities and challenges being generated by spiralling global demand. As mentioned in SDG 17, a sustainable global agriculture sector requires stable trade flows between countries and increased involvement of farmers, harvesters, and processors in the global value chain. Populations are growing and food production must grow too, but this won't necessarily happen in the same places. Food has to cross borders to get to a growing population centres, and at the same time we need efficient global food markets to cushion the impacts of local environmental and climatic events, like famines, floods, and other issues that lead to avoidable food price volatility, hunger, and deprivation. At the centre of the global food security equation is the multilateral trading system, underwritten by the WTO. That institution still sets the rules that govern the flow of food around the world, and it has done so very successfully for the last 23 years. Increasingly, though, regional and bilateral trade agreements are forming, coalitions of countries who realise the importance of upgrading the rules of global commerce. New Zealand and Europe are key players in many of these coalitions, just as we are partners in helping to improve the WTO framework. For example, many New Zealand companies are now cooperating throughout European countries with other producers. This involves complementing one another on seasonality fluctuations and, of course, the different access to markets to benefit farmers in each country. These partnerships need to provide a firm basis for the enormous investment needed to sustainably lift agriculture production to meet demand in the coming decades. There is a multitude of areas we should be focusing on to address the SDG goals. However, one thing is certain: for anything to be successful, you need to have farmers at the centre. Thank you very much.